guys, it is April from Getting Hygge With It. Today I am doing round 3 of my Konmari with me series. It's a new little series that I've got going where I go through my shelves and I have to decide what stays and what goes, what is bringing me joy and what is like holding me back. So let's get into it. This whole series has been sparked because of the state of my bookshelves. It's just, one of my bookshelves is like double stacked at this point. It looks messy and it doesn't bring me joy anymore. So I'm going like shelf by shelf and I am going to be getting rid of some books. I have a couple of rules for myself. I need to bring each shelf down to 20 books. So sometimes there's like 30 something books on them. And then I can also choose 2 books that I put on a limbo shelf. And then I can kind of go back to that shelf and decide what I want to do with them. Also, if I go over 20 books, then I have to take stuff off of my limbo shelf and like remove it forever from my library. So today I am dealing with 25 books, which is not crazy. I think I can do a good job of like dwindling that down. And these are historical fiction books. I've got historical fiction books that are set in France, Germany, and I think there might be a bit of Poland in there too. I could be wrong, but let us dive in and see what I can ditch from my shelf. First up is The Boat Runner by Devin Murphy. This is about a young boy. He's like 14. He lives with his brother Edwin. They actually live in a small Dutch town, and they help their uncle, who's like a fisherman, and they help him where they see German ships coming in, and I think they end up having to go to Hitler Youth Camp, and they kind of join forces. It does sound interesting, but there's never been a period where I've wanted to pick this up, so I think I'm just gonna let this go. First off, right away, I'm getting rid of a book, which is really, really good. So goodbye to The Boat Runner. Next up is The Paris Architect, and this takes place in World War II. I have to say a lot of these books are World War II. So it takes place in 1942, where Lucien Bernard accepts a commission that'll give him a lot of money, but it could also get him killed. And it's essentially that he has to design buildings to hide Jewish people. I think it's a specific Jewish person he needs to hide. I am fascinated by this storyline, so I'm going to keep this one on my shelves because it sparks joy. I think it's going to be a good one. Next up is a book you could never tear me away from. I absolutely loved The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. This is the story about a little girl who lives in Germany. She loses her family and she goes to stay with 2 people who are just these big, huge, kind-hearted people. And she doesn't fully understand what's going on in Germany during World War II. She knows that there's a lot of tension, and she finds solace in books and reading a lot of the time. So it's a growing up story in the midst of World War II in Germany and what that would be like, and I loved it. I will keep this forever. Next is 5/4 of the Orange by Joanne Harris, and this one really is so intriguing to me. I've always wanted to read this. This is about a woman who returns to a very small town in France. The locals don't recognize her as the daughter of this very infamous woman that they hold responsible for a tragedy during the German occupation years ago. So she shows up, and she also carries with her her mother's memories. They're all in a scrapbook, and she kind of goes through them while she's living there, and it just sounds wonderful. Doesn't that sound so good? So I'm keeping that for sure. Next is The History of Love by Nicole Krauss. This is another one that I really want to keep. It's about a girl who knows her mother is really depressed, and she wants to help her. Her mom is a translator and she's translated this book. So she decides to reach out to the author of this book that her mom is lovingly translating. And I'm hoping that it changes things around for her mom. It just sounds very heartwarming and I want to read it. So that's The History of Love. That's staying. I also have Day After Night by Anita Diamant. Okay, so I read The Boston Girl 2 years ago and I loved it. It was one of my favorite books that I'd read that year, but I've never read anything from her since, and I have all of her books, and that's a shame, I think. This one is based on a true story of a group of women who are saved from a concentration camp, and it is about these women and their bonds together. Anita Diamant writes very beautifully about women's friendships, which is so wonderful. And I want to keep this because it's her, and I know her writing is stellar, so I'm keeping that. Wow, I'm wanting to keep a lot of stuff. Oh God. Okay, this one is We Were the Lucky Ones by Georgia Hunter. This is also based on a true story, and it's the true story of the author's family who survived, or many of them at least, survived World War II, but they had to split up. They were a very close family, but they had to essentially split up. There are 3 generations that had to go all over the place in order to survive. I don't know if all of them survived, but it is about their story, and I need to know about this one. I need to read it. Next is The Undertaking by Audrey McGee. This is one that I've said I was going to read a bunch of times, and yet there's something about this that I haven't picked up, but I still desperately want to read this. This takes place in Germany about a couple who get married very randomly. This is not a marriage of love in any way, shape, or form, but they get married and they join, I think, the Hitler regime in one way or another. And it's about their downfall, and I think that sounds fantastic. So I want to keep that. Oh, I haven't even put anything in the limbo pile yet. I don't know what's going on with me. So next up is Those Who Save Us by Jenna Bloom, or Blum, I should say. And this is about a professor, I think she's a history professor of German history, and she discovers a photo of herself as a little girl and her mom. And I think both of them had survived the concentration camps, if I'm not mistaken. But this photo had them in it and also a Nazi officer. And so she's kind of going, what in the world were we posing with a Nazi officer for? What does this mean? And she goes right down the rabbit hole trying to figure it out. And it sounds really interesting. I might put this on my limbo pile because there are other books on this list that I've been a little bit more interested in. So I'm going to put this on my limbo pile for now, and then we'll see where we land a little later. Oh, a book that I just loved. All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. This is gorgeous. It won the Pulitzer, and this is about 2 people, a little boy in Germany who is recruited to become a part of Hitler's army over time. And then we also follow a young blind girl in France, and their storylines interweave at one point, and it's so well written. I think it took him 10 years to write, and you can tell it's so meticulously beautiful. I loved it. I will be keeping this one. So this one I'm not sure. I want to read it, but I haven't ever picked it up in any way. It's The Women in the Castle by Jessica Shattuck. And this is about a group of women who are all widows after their husbands, who were in the resistance against Germany, those people are killed, and they join together after their husbands die. And it does sound interesting to me. I'm gonna put it in the limbo pile again and see where I land. Okay, here's a book that can go. It's Alice Hoffman's The Marriage of Opposites. I've never been inclined to pick it up. And this is about a woman, I think she marries a man, he's an older man, and she's always had dreams of like moving to Paris. It's in the 1900s. He dies and then she falls in love with his nephew. There's nothing about it that's made me really want to pick it up, so I'm going to let this one go. I think I have another one that I'm going to let go, which is kind of surprising to me. It's A Country Road, a Tree by Jo Baker. I read her retelling of Pride and Prejudice, Longbourn. It's from the perspective of the servants, and I really enjoyed that. But this book is following Samuel Beckett in Paris, 1939, and I've never really enjoyed retellings of authors' personal lives. So I'm going to let this go. I think I didn't know that it was about that when I picked it up, so I'm going to let it go. So here's one for my limbo pile again. I will dwindle down the limbo pile and decide either to keep some stuff or not. But this is The German Girl, and this is about a young girl who gets on a ship, the SS St. Louis. It's taking Jews from Germany to Havana, and it's about the people that she meets along the way. And I think we flash forward many years later when a little girl on her 12th birthday in New York receives this package in the mail from like a stranger in Cuba, and it's from her great aunt Hannah, and inside it details what Hannah went through on this journey, and it does sound interesting. But I'm just not sure. I've heard kind of mixed things about this one, so that'll go on the limbo pile. Okay, next up is The Butterfly and the Violin by Christy Cambron. And this is surrounding an art piece. So we follow an art dealer named Sarah James, and a mysterious painting that she stumbles across is a picture of a young violinist with piercing blue eyes. As she dives into who the subject of this painting is about, she finds out the story of Austrian violinist Adele von Braun. So she was like a very popular violinist, and she was a high-ranking member of the Third Reich. However, she starts smuggling Jews out of Vienna. So it is her story. It sounds really interesting to me, so I think I'm going to keep this one. I'm going to keep it. Next up is Sarah's Key by Tatiana de Rosnay. I really enjoyed this book. This goes back and forwards in time. We follow a young girl in Paris in July of 1942. Her and her family are taken, but she has locked her brother in a closet because she doesn't want the Nazi officers to take her brother, and so she locks him in there and thinking that she'll be back in a hot second, not knowing that she's going to be gone for a very long time. I really enjoyed this, but now that I'm like having it in my hands and stuff, I think I can let this go and pass it on to someone else. Next up is Half-Blood Blues, and I really want to read this. Now, this author, I believe, wrote Washington Black, which I adored. But this takes place, I think, in France. Yes, Paris, 1940. And we follow Black musicians in Paris during World War II and their story. It sounds fascinating. It's a Giller winner, so it's Canadian, very, very important to me, so I really want to read this. Okay, I've got a book that's so old, I'm gonna have to get rid of it, but I would be happy to like pick it up if I find a better edition. This is A Very Long Engagement, and this is about French soldiers during World War I. This is like the first World War I. It's crazy. They have their hands bound and they are put right in between the French lines and the German lines. and I believe they're all killed. And one of the soldiers' fiancés wants to find out what happens. I'm really intrigued by it, but it's so old. It's super yellowed and it's kind of gross looking. So I'm going to pass this along to whoever wants to read it in this kind of format, and then look for a copy of my own that's like in better condition. Next is The House I Loved by another Tatiana de Rosnay. I'd like to keep this. This takes place in the 1860s in France. And France, or Paris at least, is being kind of reconfigured by Napoleon. He is like taking down buildings and putting up new buildings with new designs and stuff. And she's like the last person. We follow a woman who's the last person in her family home. She doesn't want to leave. I think all of her family has died and she's like hunkering down. And you hear her story of, I guess, all of the past and why that home is so dear to her. It just sounds very sad, so I'd like to keep this. Next is The Reader by Bernard Schlink. And this is about a woman who has a love affair. Well, really, she's sexually abusing one of her high school students. He discovers a few years later that she's actually on trial for a terrible crime that she committed during World War II. I think I've seen the movie for this with Kate Winslet, and I really enjoyed the movie, or it was difficult subject matter, but I think I would like to read this. So I'm going to keep it. It's also short and sweet, so I'm going to keep that one. Okay, so the next two are kind of a combination. It's Chocolat and The Girl with No Shadow. And if you've watched Chocolat, which I have, it's about a mother and a daughter who travel through France based on when the wind takes them. So she opens up little chocolate shops along the way, and it's their stories. It just sounds very whimsical, and I really would like to read these probably in the autumn. I think that's when I want to read them, so I'm going to keep both of them. Hopefully I'll like them. Another one I'm going to get rid of is The Paris Wife by Paula McLean. This is surprising to me because it's so well loved, but again, this follows very famous artists and writers, and you follow their storylines, and I just never like that in books. It's just something that kind of turns me off of books. So we meet someone who I think marries or dates Ernest Hemingway, and they meet Gertrude Stein and Ezra Pound and the Fitzgeralds, but I just don't care. So I'm going to get rid of this. Oh yeah, this is the one that's going to break my heart. The Orphan's Tale by Pam Jenoff. This is about a woman who has to give up her child, and she's on the run, and she stumbles upon a boxcar filled with Jewish babies, and they are going to be sent to concentration camps, basically to their death. And she takes one of the babies and like runs off to the circus. It sounds kind of crazy, but I know that it will make me cry, and I would like to read this, so I'm keeping it. And then the last one is The Baker's Secret. And this is a book that takes place in France, and we follow a baker who stuffs notes into their baked goods as a way to get information out there. It's during German-occupied France, and it's like their own way of resistance, which sounds really cool to me, so I want to keep this too. Okay, so I was supposed to get rid of at least 5 books, and I was able to get 6 books off of my shelves. Now I've got a few here for the limbo pile. Ugh. What am I going to put on the limbo pile? There's The German Girl, The Women in the Castle, and Those Who Save Us. I think I'm going to put The Women in the Castle back on the books that I'm going to keep. And I think I'll put these 2 on the limbo shelf. So The German Girl and Those Who Save Us. I think that's the plan. Oh, I'm doing so well with this. Like, it's feeling really, really cathartic. So this was round three. I just held up four. It's round three. Let me know in the comments below if there was a book in here that you were like, no, you should have kept that for sure. Like, by the time this goes live, it'll already be gone, sadly. But I would still love to know what your thoughts are. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will talk with you soon. Okay, bye.